So I'm a sociologist, and I'm queer, and I've long been interested in making art and producing culture. As an academic, I've studied poetry communities and careers. I regularly teach a course on the sociology of sexuality, and I've taught about cultural economies. I've also been involved in producing culture, not just through studying it, but by participating in a range of community projects, both artistic and political, queer and mainstream. And in my younger years, I was a child actor, something that thankfully only one person in this room will remember, my mom. I, at that point, was working to be a triple threat, which is show business talk for someone who can act, sing, and dance. My point is that while I've studied the production of culture, and I teach and I work on issues of sexuality, and while I'm queer, and I've been a cultural producer, this is my first public foray into combining those things and applying what I know from the sociology of culture to better understand queer cultural production and reception. So with this talk, I'm doing something that's a bit new for me. And also it's more personal, because what I want to do tonight is talk about a musical that I love. So Harry has given me a box of tissues. If there are any of my students here, you'll know that I cry when I talk about social theory. I cry when I talk about Fun Home. I cry a lot. It's just sort of part of it. I'm okay. You don't need to worry about that. So I want to try to explain my love for this musical in a way that can tell us something bigger than the fact that I'm a formal triple threat who sold my soul to academia. So what this means is that I might cry, which I've warned you about. The aim is to present some of my own experiences with the musical Fun Home as a jumping off point for exploring questions about the importance of representation, the role of resonance, and about how cultural representations can help feed and sustain those of us who can be seen as inhabiting marginalized positions, in this case, those who experience structural inequality because of our sexuality or gender. Another way to put this, more specific to this case, is that I want to explore why and how it matters to see a dyke on Broadway. So let me, if I hit this button, ooh, the thing I want to happen happens. Okay. I want to give you a roadmap for this talk. So first, I'm going to introduce you to the musical Fun Home more generally, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So you've got a sense of what I'm talking about and where it's coming from and where I'm going with it. Then I'm going to give you a narrative of how I ended up seeing Fun Home and my experiences with that. I will conveniently leave out the fact that I auditioned for the local production, got called back, and didn't get to do it. Because I get to choose what I say. So I leave out the mortifying parts, and I just move on. I'm also going to talk briefly about how gay men have often been connected to musical theater, and about how Fun Home differs from those commonly understood connections, before I then talk about representation and resonance and receptions, and then I'll conclude. And I hope we'll have some discussion, or maybe we can just sing together. That works too. So Fun Home is, that's my cat Nibbler. Fun Home is a Tony Award-winning musical. It was written by Janine Tesori, who wrote the music, and Lisa Cron, who wrote the book and lyrics. And it's the musical adaptation of Alison Bechdel's graphic novel memoir of the same name that's pictured here. The book received several awards, some that are listed on the side there, and Bechdel is a 2014 recipient of the MacArthur Genius Award. The title of the book and the musical, Fun Home, is short for funeral home, because her father, Bruce, along with being a high school English teacher, also ran the family funeral home business, and Fun Home was what their family called it for short. This autobiographical memoir is about the difficult and powerful relationship that Bechdel, a lesbian cartoon artist, had with her closeted gay father, who stepped out in front of a truck, killing himself 4 months after Alison came out to her family. Not the most likely of candidates to become a Broadway musical, perhaps. But a musical is, in fact, what I think was required to fully capture the way that this memoir represents the past and the present simultaneously, as Bechdel draws and writes herself in childhood and in young adulthood and her adult self as narrator. And the way that that's done is by having 3 voices, by having 3 actors, and by having 3 Alisons. So So having 3 people play Alison, having 3 voices make the voice of her character overall, means that Alison can sing with and to herself, and she can bear witness to the past while being rooted in the present. The vignettes that collapse time into the fabric of one life in the graphic novel employ the possibilities of harmony and ensemble singing to give representation of how our pasts are really held inside of and inform everything that we do. So we don't turn 16, we don't turn 43 as if those things are just left behind us. We add on 16 and we add on 43, and all of us just keep adding on to all of the parts of us that we've been before. So this story of Fun Home is not just the story of Bechdel's childhood, her relationship with her father, and both of them coming out. It's not that linear, and really nobody's life is. It's the story of her archiving, sorting, and representing recollections of her life. It's about the overlap between different versions of self, of memory, and identity as she searches to make something meaningful from her experiences. Or, as the narrator version of Alison sings at the beginning of the show, I want to know what's true, dig deep into who and what and why and when, until now gives way to then. See, I didn't get the part. But let me show you the trailer for the show. I want to give you a better flavor and sense of what I can do trying to present to you from this sense of this remove. So, where's my cursor? There it is. So Broadway has started making trailers for theater, which is odd and also helpful if you're giving a talk about a show that people maybe haven't seen. Oh, that's not right.
I wanna play airplane. I wanna play airplane. I wanna play airplane. I wanna put my arms out and fly like the Red Baron in a Cypress camel. No, wait. Like Superman up in the sky till I can see all of Pennsylvania.
Caption. My dad and I were exactly alike.
I see everything.
Caption. My dad and I were nothing alike. Maps show you what is simple and true. Try laying out a bird's eye view. Not what he told you, just what you see. What do you know that's not your dad's mythology?
I guess I'm older, and it's harder when you're older to begin. Peeling plaster, sagging roof, 2 missing stairs, a buckled wall. I'm fired up to do this, but on my own, oh, so much damage, broken windows, pipes are shit, crap veneer. It's hours later, Jesus, I'm still standing here.
Your swagger and your bearing and the just right clothes you're wearing, your short hair and your dungarees and your lace-up boots and your keys, oh, your ring of keys. I know you. I know you. I know you.
So, in the early 1990s, I was a baby dyke, fresh out of the closet, working as a theater technician at Buddies in Bad Times Theater, a queer and experimental theater in Toronto. I wrote freelance for Extra Magazine, Toronto's lesbian and gay bi-weekly newspaper, and I was adamant that I would never attend university. With every issue that came out, I turned to the back pages to get my bi-weekly fix of Dykes to Watch Out For, a serialized cartoon strip by Alison Bechdel that followed Mo, Lois, Sydney, Sparrow, Ginger, Stuart, Clarice, and others, and provided representation of the kinds of expectations, humor, politics, rules, and roles that were often part of lesbian life in the 90s. Dykes to Watch Out For was part of the larger cultural context I had the good fortune to live in and come out in. It's from that comic that we get the Bechdel test, which some of you may have heard of. So this is the comic strip that the Bechdel test comes from, and it's about a series of questions that you can ask of a movie to see if it's worth watching if you're a feminist. So the test is for movies. The questions are: 1, does it have at least 2 women in it? 2, do they talk to each other? 3, do they talk about something other than a man? Right? Other people have now moved on from this and said they have to have names, because otherwise alien is in there, as is mentioned in the last square of the panel. This test can also be seen as part of that 1990s queer cultural context because of the ways that it clearly emerges from earlier lesbian feminism, but also brings in the irreverent, provocative, unapologetic queer politics of the time, things that you also saw in different formations with ACT UP and Queer Nation. Many years later, when Bechdel wrote Fun Home in 2006, I eagerly read the memoir of what was, for me, an iconic author. And while I was initially surprised to hear that it was being made into a musical, I was thrilled when my academic work took me to New York in 2015, shortly after the musical adaptation opened on Broadway. I sat in my office here in St. John's, and I ordered tickets online faster than I have ever ordered anything in my entire life. I picked out front row seats, my hands shaking the whole time. So here I am, excited, clearly, to arrive at the theater, expectant and not quite believing that I was about to see a show about a butch dyke and her coming out on Broadway. Now that is out. And it was the kind of out, the kind of visibility that if you'd asked me in 1992, I never would have believed that it would be possible. Because Broadway is worth something. Broadway means something. It has symbolic capital. But what does it mean? Well, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. It's a definition of successful cultural production and distribution, where success is defined as being worthy of people's attention, of being worthy of being seen. You're damn right I brought front row seats. I was sitting right there. That's not me, because there's not piles of tissues around me already, and the show's already started. When the lights came up at the end, there was a guy who was sitting right there, and the two of us were swollen and puffy. I was leaving the theater, and people were like, "Are you okay?" "I'm gonna get a ring of keys tattooed on my arm." Anyway, so it was a really big day. So it's really commonplace to associate musical theater with gay male culture. Steve Swain, for example, in his 2001 review of 3 books that were all published in 98 and 99, books that explore connections between gay male culture and musical theater, notes that gay men, notably white gay men, have often been identified with American musical theater as creators, performers, and audience members, leading even to the term show queen, which refers to a usually flamboyant gay man who is deeply passionate about Broadway musicals and cast recordings. Interestingly, when I was looking up like show queen, how are people talking about show queens, trying to find something that wasn't derogatory to describe it. Deeply passionate is what I'm going to call it. People usually don't call it deeply passionate. They're obsessed and whatever. So, the homophobia is everywhere. While there are certainly representations of gay men in musical theater, and one of them is in a chorus line, which Alison saw with her father and is reflected in the comic strip there. It's also very common for gay male culture to read itself into musical theater. So this association of gay male culture with Broadway musicals extends into other cultural forms as well. Mayer and Wood, for example, in their study on sexuality and teen television write that, quote, "Glee fandom aligns with an affinity for musical theater, which is traditionally considered a mirror for gay culture." So it's not just that some gay men read themselves into musicals, it's that there's a general cultural tendency to associate the kitsch of musical theater with gay men, whether the characters represented are gay or not. However, lesbian culture is not similarly understood as being aligned with musical theater. It's not that there's no lesbian representation. There is some. For example, recently, The Prom has a lesbian character who wants to take her girlfriend to the dance. There's also Kate in If Then, Celie in The Color Purple, Sally in The Wild Party, and Cordelia in Falsettos, and Joanne in Rent. But as Mark Wood notes, traditionally and stereotypically, it's gay men, of course, who are supposed to be obsessed with Broadway shows and their female stars. In some ways, discussions of the connections between homosexuality and musical theater make me think of Sedgwick's metaphor of the closet and its connection with gay identity. So part of Sedgwick's argument in the epistemology of the closet is that homosexuality is contained within heterosexuality. So what that means is the thing that is presumed to be opposite is actually contained within it. So the opposite of heterosexuality is contained within itself. So most of us who are queer come from heterosexual families. We live in and move through heterosexual worlds. That's one reason why the closet metaphor is so apt, because the closet is in the house, right? It's not really a room in the house, but it's in the house nonetheless. And if the closet is in the house, then the things that are addressed to the house can be viewed from the closet, even if it requires an oblique angle. And I would argue that the relationship that's most often existed with gay male culture and Broadway musicals is connected to this relationship, where it's not necessarily direct representation, but that connection is found and it's created through creative reception and then telegraphed out through the use of those symbols and tropes within gay culture. Now, that does not mean that there's no connection between lesbian culture and musical theater beyond the handful of characters I mentioned. It's just a more academic connection. So Stacey Wolf, for example, has a book that was published in 2002, which is fabulously titled A Problem Like Maria, Gender and Sexuality in the American Musical. And in that book, she explores the ways that audiences can see the lesbian in straight characters, even in the absence of explicit lesbian representation. In other words, she makes room for lesbians as receptive and interpretive audiences to heterosexual narratives. Fun Home, however, differs here because of the explicit representation and the clearly queer storyline. There is no receptive effort required to read the lesbian into this show. In Fun Home, the lesbian reads to us. And that's a lot of words. You can read them if you want to. You don't have to if you don't want to. There's a lot that's been written about how important visibility is for gender and sexual minorities, with various scholars, Gross, for example, tracing the role of media representation in changes for lesbians and gay men challenging structural inequalities. As one reviewer put it, the role media have played, quote, in the transformation of gay men and lesbians from an invisible minority cowering in the shadows into an organized, vocal, and often highly influential force. Visibility has often been seen as a primary concern in LGBTQ activism. After all, while the closet may be in the house, it's not really acknowledged. It doesn't get counted as living space. Despite changes that have happened that help contribute to greater equality, as Lovelock notes in his forthcoming study on LGBT youth and their YouTube stories, quote, gay sexualities in this context are relatively normalized but distinctly non-normative, and this is a crucial distinction. To identify as LGB is to inhabit a complex and contradictory subject position, one which is demarcated as no longer antithetical to social inclusion and acceptance, but which is nonetheless overwhelmingly and repeatedly delineated as outside the norm. Whether in looking at the importance of archives or media representations, scholars have shown that the representation of LGBTQ lives has benefits both for the education of those outside of queer community and for the identity projects and affirmation of queer people themselves. And we've seen, too, how the ways that representation happens matters. So we have works, scholarly works, that look at production, which I haven't really gotten into much here, but they can be summarized by saying that addressing the representation at the point of production doesn't do an awful lot to change what cultural representations are produced. So just having queer people create queer culture doesn't make the culture queer because they're still working within a larger cultural, blah, blah, blah. You know the words that come next, I think, so I didn't really get into it. We also have work that looks at consumption, so it looks at how people read themselves into heterosexual narratives, how they use representations to help affirm and build identity, and finally, how they engage in resilient reception, which is a term from Cavalcante, which is a survival strategy for coping with negative media. And with representation, we have work that analyzes when and how we are represented, misrepresented, kept invisible, made the villain, killed off, straight-washed, all of it. But the volume of research in this area that looks at what the representations are is in contrast to much more limited work being done on the meaning of these representations for audiences. That is, we have a lot less attention being paid to the power dynamics that are enfolded in representation, to what is actually going on with who is being addressed. It is one thing to have a representation of a butch dyke, but it is another thing entirely to create representation that is a reflection of the audience that is being directly addressed. Inclusion in the repertoire of what is culturally fit to eat is one way to be at the table, but being fit to eat is not the same thing as being fed, and it's being fed by culture that creates a sense of resonance. So, before I move on to talk about resonance, I want to play the song Ring of Keys for you, the full song from the musical. I play this now because it's an example of representation, but of representation that's created for an audience so that it reflects. It's a representation of a moment of recognition, a recognition of self in another that is presented to straight audience members as queer representation, but for queer audience members, creates a moment where they too are recognized, not at the margin and not for the center. This here is the frame from the graphic novel upon which the song hinges. And this is from the Tony Awards.
In this panel, me and my dad in a diner.
Where's Betty?
She went home. Lorna's on now.
Caption, my dad and I both grew up in the same small Pennsylvania town.
Oh.
And I didn't know it, but both of us were gay.
Where's your beret?
And we were exactly alike.
Put it back in. Keeps the hair out of your eyes.
So what a crew cut.
And we were nothing alike.
Do not take it out again.
Which was it, Dad?
Get Lorna. Need coffee.
You didn't notice her at first, Dad, but I did. I saw her the minute she walked in. I'd never seen a woman who looked like her. It was like I was a traveler in a foreign country who runs into someone from home. Someone they've never met before, but somehow just recognizes.
Someone just came in the door, like no one I ever saw before. I feel. I don't know where you came from. I wish I did. I feel so dumb. I feel your swagger and your bearing and the just right clothes you're wearing, your short hair and your dungarees and your lace-up boots and your keys. Oh, your ring of keys. I I want. You're so... It's probably conceited to say, but I think we're alike in a certain way. Your swagger and your bearing and just right clothes you're wearing, your short hair and your dungarees and your lace-up boots and your keys, oh, your ring of keys. Do you feel my heart saying hi in this whole luncheonette? Why am I the only one who sees you're beautiful? No, I mean handsome. Your swagger and your bearing and just right clothes you're wearing, your short hair and your dungarees and your lace-up boots and your keys, oh, your ring of keys. I know you. I know you. I know you.
People know that. Oh, thank you. Harry, does anybody need some? Oh my God. Every single time. I was breathing deep, I was counting, I was trying all sorts of things. I didn't have a hope in hell. All right, back to theory. Lord help us. Resonance. Oy, oy, oy. What do we mean when we say that something resonates? In cultural theory, resonance often gets used to mean that there's a fit between the message and an audience's worldviews, but this really doesn't cut it because it's too descriptive to say that if it fits, it's resonant, and if it's resonant, it fits. Well, that's a convenient theory. What are you going to do with that? It seems to me that there's something that's far more powerful happening with resonance than that describes, and I'm much more inclined to agree with McDonnell et al. I'm going to have to say et al. Because there's a lot of them, and I don't want to leave them out, and I know it sort of leaves them out, but there you have it. McDonnell et al. From their 2017 article that works to better theorize resonance, and central to what they're arguing is that there is no inherently resonant object. There's no cultural object that has a congruence with experience or worldview that guarantees resonance. Instead, resonance is contingent and it's an emergent experience. So in their article, they ask why and how cultural messages or objects appeal to some, but not to other people. And they argue that, quote, resonance occurs as cultural objects help people puzzle through practical challenges they face or construct, end quote. So in some ways, it's about how a message can be used to provide a solution or help the receiver navigate a difficulty. So my question is, what can queer representations be used for? How do they make the transition from being representative to being resonant? And here I want to show you another song from Fun Home, and this one is called Changing My Major. And it represents a usually private moment, that moment of first queer sexual encounter. So there's a comic strip queer sexual encounter, not the most graphic one in the book, but there you have it.
What happened last night? Are you really here? Joan, 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 Joan. Hi, Joan. Don't wake up, Joan. Oh my God, last night. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, last night. I got so excited, I was too enthusiastic. Thank you for not laughing. Joan. It's a cutting-edge field and my mind is blown. I would gladly stay up every night to hone my compulsory skills with Joan. I will study my way down her spine, familiarize myself with her well-made outline, while she researches mine. I don't know who I am. I've become someone new. Nothing I just did is anything I would do. Overnight, everything changed. I'm not prepared. I'm dizzy, I'm nauseous, I'm shaky. I'm scared. Am I falling into nothingness or flying into something so sublime? I don't know, but I'm changing my major to Joan. I thought all my life I'd be all alone, but that was before I was lying prone in this dorm room bed with Joan. Look, she drooled on the pillow, so sweet, all sweaty and tangled up in my bedsheet, and my heart feels complete. Let's never leave this room. How about we stay here till finals? I'll go to school forever. I'll take out a dementedly huge high-interest loan. 'Cause I'm changing my major to Joan.
Isn't that great? It's so great. I love it so much. I love and I recognize this exuberance and this terror and the experience of something previously foreign revealing itself as home, as if every movie you ever saw before was in black and white. And did you know they make them in color? Oh my God. So what is this message used for? It's used for affirmation of identity, but what does that even mean? It's used for categorization of experiences as shared. It's used for building and acknowledging similar shared experience and culture. And similar shared experience and culture gives us a sense that we can understand something, that we can maybe predict something, even though our predictions aren't always so right. And that there's not just a void, but there's something that we can hold on to. And this is familiar territory for sociologists. Social theory of many kinds tries to make sense of what on earth we do with the possibility of nonsense, about the threat of nonsense. So Berger and Luckman, for example, argue, although not exactly in these words, that people construct social worlds to give order and meaning to their lives in the face of an awareness of the ultimate meaninglessness of existence. Which is why I cry when I teach social theory. And then you move on to Goffman, and he writes about how the moment that we're in front of each other, there are risks, there are vulnerabilities, and there's possibilities. But that having a shared frame or a definition of the situation helps us to manage that risk, to know what's likely to happen, right? I'm not likely to come out into the audience and sit on anybody's lap. That would be awkward, right? We have a shared definition of the situation. I'm up here behind a podium. Strangely, I have a lot of tissues. That's a slight difference, but that's okay. Anyway, now I want you to listen to something else. There's not going to be that much more listening, I'm sorry. This song doesn't have anything to watch with it. This is Edges of the World, and it's a song that's sung by Bruce, Alison's father. He sings this song 4 months after Alison comes out, after they've tried to have a conversation in the car, but they're unable to really hear what the other person is saying. They can't really hear each other. They can't see what's happening. He's bought a new property. He's obsessed with fixing up the old house that they've lived in. And he's wanting to fix up this new property, but it's in horrible, horrible shape, and he has to do it all on his own. It's all metaphorical, of course. This song also represents the last moments of his life before he steps in front of a truck.
I fucking love beginnings flying high. It's hard to know where to start. It's all so fast, I'm trying not to spin. I guess I'm older, and it's harder when you're older to begin. Peeling plaster, sagging roof, two missing stairs, a buckled wall. I'm fired up to do this, but on my own at all. So much damage, broken windows, pipes are shit, cracked veneer. It's hours later, Jesus, I'm still standing here, still standing here. But when the sunlight hits the parlor wall at certain times of day, I see how fine this house could be. I see it so damn clear. What's the matter? Why am I standing here? Bad foundation, twisting floorboards, shoddy pipes, gaping hole. It's a lot to keep under control. Something's cracking, something's rotting, piles of ruin and debris. Killing me, crushing me, pushing me. But when the sunlight hits the parlor wall at certain times of day, I see how fine this house could be. I see it so damn clear. What's the matter? Why am I standing here? Dear Al, I'm scared. I had a life I thought I understood. I took it and I squeezed out every bit of life I could. But the edges of the world that held me up have gone away, and I'm falling into nothingness or flying into something so sublime. And I'm a man, I don't know, who am I now or do I go? I can't go back, I can't find my way through. I might still break a heart or two, but when the sunlight hits the parlor wall at certain times of day, I see how fine this house could be. I see it so damn clear. Oh my God, why am I standing here?
One of the reasons that I played that is that I want you to note that in the song Changing My Major, when Alison is confronted with how foreign the possibilities of sex with Joan are to her and how scared that makes her feel, she sings, "Am I falling into nothingness or flying into something so sublime?" Words that her father echoes with the same musical phrase when he faces, I'm going to cry, I'm sorry, when he faces looking at a life he thought that he understood and sings the exact same thing. Am I falling into nothingness or flying into something so sublime and steps in front of a truck. So I'll turn back to McDonnell et al. Again, who write that resonance helps identify lines of action towards ends in view, potentially revising people's desires and imagining of what is possible. With both of these characters, we see representations of what people do with not knowing what is possible, with facing the possibility of nonsense, an experience often shared by those who are not straight or cisgender, where the rules and expectations that we've grown up with suddenly don't hold anymore. The fit is a little or a lot off. We've lost resonance. With queer resonance, I think part of the point can be that we, the queers, are in the audience, not just that we are represented. While representation can make resonance possible, representation doesn't always resonate on its own, and queer resonance doesn't always require representation. As I mentioned earlier, queer audiences have found resonance in materials that don't explicitly address us and that may or may not have intentionally included us as audience members. My own cultural consumption that feeds me with queer resonance includes Witchblade, Long Kiss Goodnight, The X-Men, Wolverine, Xena, The Facts of Life, One Day at a Time, X-Files, Nancy Drew, The Sound of Music, Cagney and Lacey, and I'm sure that many of you have others that you can offer to the pile. And the positive effects of resonance are different than those of representation. Why? Because resonance is what feeds us. Representation is how we are eaten. And that is the central point that I want to make. The point I'm making is that with Fun Home, we are the audience, and that matters as a way to understand further what is involved in really addressing structural inequalities. We often talk about the importance of recognition, of representation, and redistribution as central both to understanding how inequality works and what we can do to work toward greater equality. But to be addressed is part of being recognized. So what's happening in this show is that lesbian characters, or at least 3 versions of this one lesbian character, are presented at the center of their own worlds. Alison is not just represented, but like in Dykes to Watch Out For, the comic strip, while the marginal positions that Dykes are often placed in is part of the story is one where Dykes are at the center of their own worlds, even if those worlds are marginalized. Being presented as being at the center of your own world is a familiar place to stand for those in positions of structural privilege. And maybe that's part of what makes this music resonant and powerful for people outside of queer communities as well. It's relatable, sure, because we all know love, we all know family, and unfortunately, because so many people have experience of families bending around difficult, abusive men, but more importantly, the show is relatable because it is addressed clearly to someone in the center of their own world. And that is how those in positions of structural privilege are usually addressed and how they could be better equipped to see us.
If I remember right, we met in the mid-90s, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah.
I was at Falsettos on Broadway in the early 90s. And it was interesting because it was a weekday matinee. And I would say the whole audience just about was Jewish matrons and gay men. And we all knew it. Like we all knew not just the show Falsettos because it was the gay context, but musical theater because it was us. And it was a few years ago, Neil Patrick Harris, in the opening of the Tonys, sang a song that was, "It's not just for gays anymore." And I think there's an argument, and here's, I totally accept all your argument, and by the way, great presentation, you've got
Thanks.
Great style. But I think arguably musical theater is gay male culture. that gay male culture inhabits it in a way that other queer possibilities don't control many art forms. We can enter them, we can do things with them, we can have part of them, but we don't control them. The warble that the dad does, that lovely tenor vibrato, has become the standard emotional resonance for the lead male on musical theater. And so you get straight performers like Mandy Patinkin who do that wonderfully. And it's such a gay thing. I mean, that may my view, but it's such a gay thing. So what's interesting about this is that you're finding a lesbian side, but it does seem to me to be still about the topic.
Yeah.
Whereas I think now, when somebody in Carousel sings My Little Girl, that ridiculously heterosexual song, it's usually done in a gay male warble. and therefore, you know, musical theater is a gay thing. So that's all.
I so don't disagree with you, Terry. I mean, there are good reasons also why when the lights came up, the gay fellow across the way was just as destroyed as I was. And my...
Probably felt the same way in Oklahoma.
Well, yeah, and I might have too, actually, right? So like, and that this is part of it. That there is not necessarily always that division within queer culture, right? That there are ways that we hear and see each other and participate. There are differences and differences which matter, but that I agree that this is also that Fun Home is also gay male culture, absolutely, but also. How cool that there was a bull dyke. How cool. And she was there being a bull dyke. She wasn't the kind of character that you would read as a bull dyke in gay male musical theater because that's how you'd read it because you know it's gay. She just really was. Like, that's pretty cool, right? So I don't disagree with you. I just say yes and. Yeah. Yeah, and I ball in everything. Yeah, so I don't know if I needed therapy after Oklahoma like I did after Fun Home, but you know, that's a different thing. Hi.
Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of her second memoir about her mother.
Are You My Mother?
Are You My Mother? No,
Sorry, I don't know what her sign is or like where she gets her coffee in the morning. I'm not creepy, I promise. Yeah.
I wasn't as moved by that one. I was more troubled by that one. Do you think that that could make another musical?
I don't know if I can conjecture about whether it could make a good musical or not. It doesn't hold together in the same way. I think it may not hold together in the same way because her mother's still alive. It's one thing to retell the story of somebody who is not able to tell it themselves so that you can tell your story about your relationship with them. It's completely, and there were difficulties that she had in terms of writing that story with her extended family about the relationship and how the family grew up. But to actually be writing about your relationship with your mother for public consumption when you have flipped the authority and you've got the Genius Award and she's just your mom, except nobody's ever just your mom. It's still your mom, right? So hats off to her for writing it, and I totally get why it doesn't hold together in the same way. That's not really an answer, but it's something to say in response, right? So, which is my job right now, I think. But so I don't think that it would be a good musical, but also I never would have thought that Fun Home would be a good musical. Like never in a million years. So I read it and like, this is incredible, this is beautiful, it's gonna be a musical. What the fuck? Are you serious? Like at what point? Here we go. Like it didn't compute, so I can't imagine.
Could you sing that now?
Could I sing what?
Just sing all of that.
I
that you
did
just
like
said.
a slight interpretive dance. That was something. I'm not really a triple threat. I'm just sort of like a triple twitch. It's yeah.
Great speech. That was awesome. As a fellow big fan of Alison Bechdel, I just have a question for you. In Dykes to Watch Out For, Alison ruminates neurotically on whether or not she may have accidentally created butch culture. Through Dykes to Watch Out For. I was wondering what your thoughts on that are. Is that possible, or is that her being ultra neurotic?
Well, I think that
All the older ones are laughing.
I'm going to, yeah, exactly. No. That's my answer. No, she did not create butch culture. Perfect. No, and there's lots of people who I think can vouch for that. Like I can give you a reading list if you want, but you've probably read it all already. And there's lots of people. No, absolutely not. And she's not even the one who ever did it best.
Okay, so there were certain things that she said that, like through Dykes to Watch Out For, I guess she brought things to light that then became mainstream.
I think that one of the things that I think I saw happening, I cannot say anything definitively about this, is if you look at the different sorts of things that get represented in Dykes to Watch Out For, it's stuff that all of us knew was happening everywhere, but nobody ever talked about was happening everywhere. So everybody pretended, oh, there's no rules. Bullshit, there's no rules. There are rules, and look, she's pointed them out, right? That's not creating culture, but naming it is part of the creation of it. So, but it was there, and it was happening. And the reason why it resonated is because it helped and reflected at the same time, right? It gave people tools for going, oh, I get it. This is apparently how we do things. It's not just that I have a really weird group of friends where everybody's ex is, right? Like, yeah.
So when I first picked up the graphic novel, I had no idea what I was getting into to read. Thank you. It was like a literary work of art, reading it, really. And I'm just wondering if she chose that specific medium because she knew that it would have a more impactful, resonance with everyone. Did it get looked at easier because it was a graphic novel to turn into a musical? Would it have gone unnoticed maybe if it was just more of a memoir written with just text? Like, these are all the things I've been kind of just wondering about and looking up.
My understanding is that it wasn't that conscious, that she, help me out if you know the story better than I, that she was working a desk job and wrote like a scribbled thing. This is how Dykes to Watch Out For started. She wrote like a scribbled picture that said, Dyke to Watch Out For, number 27. Carol has an issue with a coffee maker, or like I don't even know what it was, right?
So as Bob Ross says, it's a happy little accident.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that I don't think that it was an intentional thing. I strangely, I don't think that she had a grand plan to have her life on Broadway. I don't
just noticed it.
Yeah, no, I don't think that it was intentional. That doesn't mean that we couldn't do some kind of analysis of how the format made some things more possible, how it precluded some things and made other things more possible. Like, it's true, that doesn't have anything to do with intention, though. That has to do with what we're going to make out of her work, which is a different form of cultural production, so it depends on what we want to make. Yeah.
When you were talking about Sedgwick's Closet, I wonder how queer people who want to make queer artwork within heteronormative structures sort of do so without upholding them, or are we sort of always bound to be within or without, or is there something else?
Okay, there's a lot of pieces to that question. So no, I just want to unpack.
Is there a different house?
I think it's actually a really interesting.
Yeah, is there a different house, and how can we make that through our own?
Yeah, and my easy answer is Buddies in Bad Times Theater. Right. Still in sort of a straight neighborhood, even though it's at Church in Wellesley. So, is there a different house? Yes, I think that there is a different house, but that we can't do that house without putting queer people in the audience. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like that's one of the things that I have sometimes found frustrating, is that I'll go to something which is a queer event, and I think, wow, I'm not even supposed to be in this room. Yeah. This is an educational opportunity that I don't need. Yeah. And it's my only possibility for an engagement with supposedly queer culture, but it's not. It's an engagement with straight culture's encounter with queerness.
Yes.
And that I'm far less interested in, and I would like to see us make things for ourselves, and we can invite people into our house, right? But it's got to be our house.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm interested in comics and studying comics, and I've studied this graphic memoir, and so the form of graphic memoir allows for this three-voiced narrator and like essentially a split identity split into, in this case, three. And I thought it was super interesting that it was a musical that was the other medium that could also do this. Like you couldn't do that in prose.
No.
And I can't think of any other medium that you could really do it in, maybe a movie. And so secondly, one of the things about graphic memoir is that it constantly points to its subjectivity and how it's created, like the story is created for a purpose. And so I noticed in the musical, one of the Alison Bechdels is actually shown at a desk drawing the comic.
Yep.
And I wonder, because this is authored by another couple of authors, it's not actually authored by Alison Bechdel, like the musical is. Like, who now owns the story? Like, where does Alison Bechdel, the author, exist in the musical? Like, is it actually her memoir now, or is it just like a fictional story?
Okay, so I'm going to be cheeky. Was it ever actually her memoir? Who is Alison anyway? Who am I anyway? Who are you anyway? Like we can,
Yeah, it's true.
We can go in lots of. So I think that it's something that is about her, but also exists outside of her. So it reminds me a little bit. So this parallel might not quite hold all the way. So if I need to pull it back, just please forgive me because I'm going on the fly here. The idea of there's the difference between an author and an author function. So an author is a person who like makes breakfast and has a cup of coffee and sits down to write, and then the author function, which is this, I don't know, give me an author's name. This is Alison Bechdel, right? So this is and there is a function to that. She is not the author function, even though that's her name, right? This is not all of her story, even though it is about her, right? So it is of her and about her. Is it hers? No. Because it's cultural production that's been put out, and it is continually made and reproduced and made in different ways through reception, right? So Howard Becker asks questions about when is an artwork done, and it's not up to the artist, right? It gets finished every single time it's received. And it gets finished every time it's received, every time it's responded to, which is why I talked about, when we were talking about you could analyze it that way, and that would be another form of cultural production, right? So if you look at the field of literary studies, that's cultural production. So you study graphic memoir, what you're making is your cultural production using that. It is also part of one of the many endings of the work that you're looking at. I've said a lot of things, and I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
No, that was great. Thank you.
No? Okay. All right. Thanks. Anyone else? Thank you very much. It was a huge treat. I love this show a lot. And I got to just like fan all over the place and get people pay attention to me loving something. Like, how redonkulously self-indulgent is that? So thank you for indulging me, and have a really good night, and thank you, Harry.